The fifth principle, I call it the super techniques, and there are several. Let's talk about acceleration first because it's a pretty basic principle and it comes back in the other techniques that we'll see later. It's usually okay to speed up a load or a cart, especially when the weight is light, and even sometimes to accelerate it a little faster when necessary. But it's important to know that there is also a limit to how fast we should go, especially if the load is heavy. For example, here I accelerate the cart really quickly, and what happens in our body when we accelerate the load really quickly like this is an increase in the loading of our lower back, but also perhaps in other structures like the wrists and shoulders. So in addition to the distance, the angle of inclination of the back, and the weight of the box, if I accelerate the load really quickly, here too I could increase the risks of a lower back injury. To see it clearly, let's see what is the effort that I measured with a rapid acceleration of the cart. Here I measured 21.35 kilo or about 47 pounds. Then with a slower acceleration of the cart, I measured 3.3 kilo or 7.3 pounds. So we get that the ideal is to accelerate the loads progressively when possible. One of the super techniques is to lift the load with the legs rather than with arms, to put it high up. It is simply a matter of bending your knees slightly to accelerate the load with the legs, as if you were throwing a basketball. As you can see here, the idea is to bend your knees slightly to accelerate the load with the legs. The hands only keep the load balanced. Of course, ideally, we will try to avoid placing heavy loads high up like that. But we know that sometimes, due to lack of space, we don't really have a choice but to store certain boxes above shoulder height. We will then be careful not to put the heaviest boxes up high when possible. But for certain activities, like for example to stack crates of dairy product up high, we don't really have a choice but to bring the heavy loads high. And this technique can then be very useful. Another technique that can be used to lift something is to do it using one leg, with what I call the Taekwondo Technique. In the previous technique, we talked about doing the effort with both legs, but here we will make the effort using only one leg. So you put the load on one leg and then we lift it up. Let's review the method in slow motion. The first thing I do is I support the load on the leg. Then I take a big step forward with a large base, and then I will lift the load with the leg. Usually, we will use this technique at lower heights or to place objects in a restricted space, such as the back seat of a car, for example. One of the goals here is to make less efforts with the arms, therefore to better distribute the efforts over the entire body during the day, especially the legs. Another goal here is to avoid certain restrictive postures depending on the context. For instance, pushing a box underneath a counter. Now, of course, this is not a technique that is for everyone. It will depend on your level of comfort in lifting your leg like this. And if you have hip pain, for example, maybe you should consider using another technique. As we know, each person is unique. You have to choose techniques that works for you. Now, another method you might want to use is to push the load with your foot. So is it okay to kick a load with your foot? Yes, it can be okay, depending on the context. In the context we see here, we have to place a large, fairly light box in a small space. If the box is not too heavy, it can be a good idea to place it on the ground near the space where we need to put it, and then push it forward with your foot, and if possible, find a point of support with your hand to help keep your balance. I've already talked about this point in my first video. In manual handling, when possible, we will try to keep a support point for the load on the ground or on the surface to reduce the effort we have to make. This can be useful when you have a load that can roll, like a tire. There are also other examples that we can use. Here we have a large trash can to move, and it seems quite heavy. Could we work differently? Well, yes, a trash can, a barrel, or even a large propane tank. These are all objects that we can move by tilting and rolling them, constantly keep a support point on the ground. And if we have a long distance to cover, it can be worth using handling equipment like a transport cart or hand truck to reduce the effort we have to make. It's also possible to reduce the efforts by keeping a point of contact on the floor or on the surface and then sliding the object instead of lifting it. In general, the effort necessary to lift an object while keeping a point of contact is about half the weight of the object. And the same goes with pushing or putting an object to slide it on the surface. Depending on the friction, the effort is about half the weight of the object as well. When I move an object, I want to have it in my hands for as little time as possible. No one wants to work for no reason. So if I have an object that I'm carrying that is not too fragile, I can simply drop it on the ground to avoid having to spend energy to put it down gently by bending my knees. In summary, we have seen that there are really interesting and useful techniques in manual handling. We can accelerate an object, but gradually to avoid excessive efforts. We can lift an object using both legs with basketball technique or just one leg with a Taekwondo technique to limit the effort we have to make with our arms. We can push an object with our foot when possible. We can also keep support points on the ground or on surfaces, such as for rolling a large trash can, lifting an object while keeping a point of contact, or sliding an object on the surface. And we can drop objects that are not too fragile directly on the floor to limit the time that we are carrying them.